This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 482, featuring Todd Sattersten, publisher at Bard Press. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vasilopoulos, founder of Reboot Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Jan Rutherford, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders. And as Jim said, we've got a lot of past episodes, and they are all available to you via our catalog at theleadershippodcast.com. And if you've got a question, looking for a topic, let us know.
Yeah. And today we're kind of lucky because we got a good friend on the podcast, and another good friend is our sponsor, Darley. They are trusted by warfighters and firefighters since 1908. Darley is dedicated to equipping our military and first responders with the essential tools they need for mission success, from fuel and firefighting pumps to drones and tactical solutions. Discover more about this incredible company and the people who serve our nation's heroes at Darley.com. That's DARLEY.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
Thanks, Jim. And our guest today is Todd Sattersten. He spent 20 plus years in nonfiction book publishing. He's the co-author of the 100 best business books of all time and the former president of 800 CEO Read. He's also a good friend of Jim and I. And I can tell you that the thing I would say about Todd is he asks some of the best questions. And my latest book, Jim's latest book, wouldn't be where they're at without Todd's great questions at the very beginning. And for that, we really appreciate him. We're really excited to have him on the show. Todd, welcome.
Jim, Jan, thanks for having me. This is awesome. I'm thrilled. I was trying to think back because it's been 5, 6, 7 years. I think we've known each other now. And so just to be able to, we're going to spend a little time talking about this thing that we all love, which is just awesome. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I was even channeling you the other day. I was talking to my mastermind and they were talking about how business books have changed. And I thought about you saying, geez, in the 80s, there was the Japanese oriented business books, and then In Search of Excellence. And now business books have to be self-help. I mean, you always have a take on the book publishing. Before we get into all that, though, I wanted to ask, what's not in the public bio? What don't you put out there normally about Todd Sattersten, other than you live in Portland?
Yeah, I would say that there's a thread in my life of being a tour guide. And so I was a tour guide in university. I spent 5 years being the guy who took people around, showing them the buildings, giving them as much information as possible. And that thread kind of continued really almost to this day. Like last year, I took a group of friends to Japan, something I'm familiar with and speak the language a little bit. So there's something about that interests me, the way that tour guides kind of navigate the world and engage the world and help others engage the world. And I thought that might be an interesting little insight to put next to this as we kind of start the conversation today.
Yeah, so I can see it. I can see it. So tour guide, you're gonna help us understand all these books. Again, you've always got great insight on what sells, what doesn't, why. You've read and reviewed hundreds of books, and you've curated now the best, about leadership for work and life and different things. And we even have talked about, do people even read books anymore in the age of information overload? How did you go about, the best books for work and life? How did you go about selecting the 25 chapters and the books within those?
Yeah. So you mentioned in the introduction that I did a book in 2009, a book that was really focused on the business book category.
Right.
And the process we used there ended up being really similar to the process that we used this time, where I knew the first 60 or 70 books that was going to be in this. In the prior book, it was business books. In this one, I wanted to bring a wider aperture to it. I wanted to say, what would it be like to find a set of books that would help people both in their professional lives as well as their personal lives? So the aperture changes there. There's a different set of books that you can include. So once I had that initial set of books, I started just kind of looking at them. I literally had 2 shelves sitting here next to me of just what's showing up here? What are we seeing as topics that are interesting? And What was really important to me about this particular book was that I wanted to get the reader closer to the problem faster. So 25 chapters, 4 to 6 books in each chapter. And I wanted to give in each chapter the ability for someone to see a variety of perspectives on that topic. It got interesting because, as you all well known as being well-read folks, a book that you might read and love could fit in one category or another category or another category. So what's the best place to put a book next to another set of books that can really help the reader see a different way to potentially work with a challenge or problem that they're worked on? So those 25 topics, those 25 chapters are really what I think are the most common problems that people are dealing with.
Hmm. How did you come up with those? I mean, you know, when you say you think these are the most common, how did you come up with that?
Well, it's because when you started looking at the books that were in the list, what do you see? You see goal setting, you see habits, you see leadership,
Yeah.
you see relationships, you see motivation, you see the topics almost appeared in and of themselves, Jan. Like that part actually wasn't particularly difficult. It's what was really important to me is that each chapter in the book actually has one word to it. I wanted people to be able to see the chapter and go, oh, that, yes, that's what I need. And then in the introduction, I even say this. I even say, hey, listen, think about a problem that you're working on right now. And someone goes, oh, okay. Look at the list of chapters, go to that chapter, and in the next 10 minutes, you'll find 4 great books that can help you with that, both through the summaries as well, hopefully to find a book that you can then dig into even more deeply. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's so interesting because as you were talking about the tour guide comment, what I was thinking about
Mm.
is you were kind of describing that, but like if I was reliving kind of the experience I had working with you, was the feeling that maybe many people who are listening to this will never know, but like going to the library, you know, because back in the day we had to like use the card catalog. If you're lazy like me, you would just develop a relationship with the librarian. And if it was a good librarian, you'd like, hey, I'm looking for a book about this or that. And they'd talk to you, ask you a few questions, and they'd take you over to some bookshelf and pull out a book and give it to you and be like, oh, thank you. And so I thought about like that experience, that curated experience of someone kind of giving you exactly what you need in the way you need it in the moment you need it is kind of the way I look at your compendium of knowledge about books and the way I look at this book. I'm fascinated by that because I think we've lost that experience with the internet.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
What I would add to that is that the experience of going to a bookstore or going to a library, like you described, is that there are solutions hiding everywhere. And they're literally hiding, right? Because in a library, you've got the weird Dewey Decimal System that categorizes books in all these unusual ways and then categorizes the books oftentimes by author's last name, not by the title of the book. You walk into a bookstore and you might have a book sitting over on the business shelf that could equally be sitting over on self-help and personal growth. Or there might be one hiding back behind you on body, mind, spirit even. So for me, what I wanted to try to do was be the person who would walk through either one of those buildings, pull some stuff off the shelf, maybe put it together in a chapter and say, maybe you know these books, maybe you don't, but I want to put these together for you and maybe help you see the problem that you're working on differently. That's the most interesting thing to me about what I was trying to do in the book. They're not really book reviews. You know, they're not a book summary. They're almost like some kind of interpretation of how the book might be important to you. Like I want to convince you to go read these books. Like I don't want it to be like, oh, I read Todd's book and I don't have to read any of these 100 books. Oh my gosh, I hope not. I hope that's not what's happened. I hope I've convinced you to go read 50 of them. I hope you've read 50 or 20 or 10, and that I convince you to go read 20 or 30 more because you know that they'd be really helpful to something that you're working on.
Yeah. And I think that's so wonderful because, you know, as I look through the list of books, I'm like, wow, there are a lot I hadn't read. And anyone who, you know, watches the video here will see like, okay, we got books behind us. All of us have tons of books behind us. Only like a portion of the books we've got, you know, we've got just like way more bookshelves filled with books. And I thought, wow, I hadn't read as many as I thought. But considering that, because you have just read a ton of books, one of the questions I know I get from people is like, what are the trends and patterns you see? And I'm kind of a pattern guy. What are the trends and patterns that you kind of see as you like look at these 100 books, whether it's in the business books or this genre that you're covering with, more self-help oriented for work and life? What are the patterns you've distilled out of all this knowledge that might be lasting?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them. So let me just maybe highlight a few. I think the first one is that, here's my line. Someone's probably said it. I'm probably just paraphrasing someone. I don't even know it right now because I've read so much. But growth comes from the belief that change is possible. So I'll just say that one more time. Growth comes from the belief that change is possible. And it's not any mistake that I started the entire book with Carol Dweck, with mindset. And for folks who aren't familiar with her, sort of her philosophy, she said, there's psychology that kind of, you can test people and you can see who has a fixed mindset, believing that I'm as good as I'll ever be, I'm as smart as I'll ever be. There's not another skill I could possibly acquire. And then there's people who have a growth mindset and they believe it's possible for me to get better and better and better and better and better. The second book in the 100 Best is Andrew Erickson's Peak. He's the person who's well known because actually Malcolm Gladwell made him popular with the 10,000 hour rule around do something for 10,000 hours and you will be an expert. But what's more fascinating to me about Anders is the fact that he said, I have never, in all the experts that I ever studied, I never found someone who reached the peak. I actually never found someone who could not get better. That's remarkable to me. Like, that's absolutely remarkable. This guy who studies experts says, I've never met someone who couldn't get better at what they were doing. So I think that's one thing that we should keep in mind, that when I think about leadership is a journey of growth. It's a journey of both figuring out what change is possible for myself, but also what change is possible for those around me, and what change can I take place in the world. And if I don't believe that growth is possible for myself or my team, then how do I expect that any change is going to happen in the world? So I think that's a really great one. The other one that I just think about an awful lot is whatever version of how you think about this in your head, which is daily effort matters. The effort that you put in on whatever it is that you're doing on a daily basis matters. It accumulates. Whether it's we get the growth that we were just talking about, or it's people start watching what we're doing. They pay attention. Like, people pay attention to that, like, every day, day in, day out. What it is that you're doing, you become a model for other people, either directly because they want to you become inspiration for them, or you become inspiration and they get to go do the thing that was really important to them. I'm amazing how often that daily effort shows up, whether it's the book, The Progress Principle. The psychology on this is super clear, where whether we've had a good day or a bad day, if we record our progress towards a goal, we are motivated to continue into the next day at a higher level than we just do the thing that one day and do the thing the next day. A book that we publish at Bard Press, The One Thing, it's very clear. The core question of that book is, what's the one thing I could do today to make something easier or completely not needed, right? So I could probably keep going on, Jim, with some other themes, but when I think of the two that come to mind and I think about leadership, I'm thinking about those two things. I'm thinking about growth, and I'm thinking about what does my daily actions look like towards that end.
Yeah. Just kind of curious as you go through this, because I know a lot of times, let's say in practical world, I'm in sales and my product has 4 value propositions, and I go through and I'm talking about number 1 and you like it. What should I do? I should stop selling immediately. Okay. Don't sell past the close. If I sold you on that first value proposition, I don't necessarily have to cover the other 3, because I can only talk you out of something that you might not like, that. And that 4th issue that you might not like as much might poison the other ones. And so we always want to kind of stop when we're ahead. But like when you're putting a book together, all your chapters have to work together to make a point. but sometimes there's a chapter that stands out. Like that's the one that's like, that's the killer. Out of all the books you've read, and out of all the chapters, are there any that stand out? Are there any where it's just like that chapter in that book stands above like the entire book almost?
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of that in each one of these books. What you're making me think of, Jim, is another theme that I think shows up in really great books is the fact that a different way to define the problem creates a different way to solve the problem.
Hmm.
Right. And so maybe I'll say that. That's one of those phrases. Maybe I'll say again, a different way to define the problem creates a different way to solve the problem. And I think this shows up over and over and over again in really great books. So there's a book by Kathy Sierra called Badass, and it's a book about product development. It's how do you make a better products. And she kind of fools you because she actually says, I don't think you should care about great products. You should actually, or better products, making better products. You should actually work on creating better customers. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean if I actually think, oh, I want the best customers in the world who are doing the most amazing things in the world with the things that I make? I think of Fred Reichelt's The Ultimate Question, where he says, profit's great, sales are great, but maybe the question that's more important is what's the likelihood someone else would recommend you to a friend or colleague? That changes completely the equation of how it is that I operate my business. It solves a marketing problem. It solves a sales problem. It solves a whole variety of things. So for me, when I think about that chapter like that you're talking about, or when I think about really great books, it's the book that goes, hey, how do I think about a problem differently than I had before? And suddenly I've got a new mindset and I got a completely different direction I can go.
Hey, when you were going through this, Todd, were you looking at books that have stood the test of time? Books that were trendy? You and I have talked about habits, the Atomic Habits. There's other habit books that came along before that one and they didn't go gangbusters. And I look at that and I'm like, well, geez, this goes back to the fact that nobody has any self-discipline and they're all looking for it. But I'm just wondering, how did you balance that? Things were trendy, best-selling versus stuff that stood the test of time.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you define stood the test of time too. I think that's a really interesting, kind of trendy versus enduring is another way that I think you and I have talked about it. I'm nervous about trendy. I'm nervous about, you won't find a lot of books in the 100 best about companies. I think that's a trend that can really get people into trouble. It might be helpful in a very short time window to know about a company and read about it. Same thing with a company leader, that someone might have a really great insight in a really particular window of time that might be helpful. But I think over and over and over, we found either that those companies don't hold up, those leaders don't hold up, the insights don't hold up. And so I'm really nervous about including that sort of work. I'm much more interested in figures who've either studied history or done original research or looked more deeply at these topics than I think what you're talking about. Even thought leaders, though, Jan, concern me sometimes too, because you can get someone who's written 7 books and suddenly, oh my gosh, I've got to include all of those. So in the 100 best, I've generally just chosen one book by somebody who's really great. So Peter Drucker, I think it continues to be important. His work, even though it was done in the 50s, most of it was done in the 50s, 60s. It can miss a little context nowadays, but I still think it rings true. So I included Effective Executive in the 100 best because I still think that book matters.
What were your thoughts on historical perspectives or even novels that can be pretty, provide a really great perspective? What were your thoughts there?
I have 2 thoughts. One is that I would love to include more fiction in what I could recommend to other people. My concern there is that the people who tend to read fiction have a particular view, normally, of both business and of leadership. And it's not a positive one. It's actually very difficult to find good fiction where the leader is actually the hero and not the villain. And I wish there was more of that. I wish there was more. My best example, if people are interested in that topic that you're talking about, Jan, my favorite book on this is Questions of Character by Joe Bottaraco. Joe used fiction in a class at Harvard in the business school. And every week they read either a short story or a section of a book. And these were leadership challenges that the fictional characters had to deal with. And I think he's done the best job of both including that fiction, but also then processing that fiction for a leader to understand what are the dilemmas that a leader is going to deal with when they come up against the toughest challenges. I'm surprised that I'm even saying this, but I wish I could recommend it more.
Oh. Just curious, who's reading fiction these days, demographically?
Oh, I mean, well, if you look at the overall book publishing market, it's always actually leaned to a female demographic. 60% of readers are women. And then if you end up in literary fiction, romance, self-help, frankly, you end up with an audience that is, again, sort of leaning in that direction. So more women than men, but I think you certainly see other statistics that are really interesting to me that always surprise people. 80% of books that are sold are still print books. So that says something. Like, what is that? I don't think it means that it's people all our age are still reading. I have a son who just turned 21 and he's read 1,000 books in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, people are still reading. I'm not concerned about books going away or people stop reading. I think we're still seeing it. Parents are still buying children's books. The publishing industry is still a multi-billion-dollar industry. I think the problem that book publishers like myself have to figure out for readers is, where does this fit into your life? Because there's a lot of competition now. Netflix's competition, Spotify's competition. So where does a book fit? And I think a book still does something that almost every other art form doesn't do.
One other question, and then do you think this also is sort of competing headspace with Stoic philosophy? That's
So say more, Jan.
I mean, a lot of it's like, hey, you're looking for guides of how you should think, feel, know, be a better person, like you said, if you believe in growth, and then what are you going to do about it? I mean, people are looking for those things. You and I have talked about Buddhism before. Stoicism. I mean, are those just as totally separate, or are they competition for what you're trying to help, get people to think about and spend time on?
I think the people who understand the value of books and read them on a regular basis understand that there's a tremendous value in listening to the work that other people have already done. Like, there's a whole bunch of people who've already done the work for you of thinking about a problem, identifying a set of effective solutions. And whether it's the Stoics or the Buddhists or the Taoists or the Christians, or the Jews, like everybody, like there have been over and over and over again, lots of folks that have taken different approaches to those solutions. And I think it almost goes back to your trendy versus enduring question, which is, I do think we tend to write the same books over and over again because there's a new context. There's a new context in which individuals have grown up in and listened. Like, my kids are COVID kids. Like, all of them are in their early 20s now, but they experienced grade school and high school largely for a number of years on a computer screen like we're doing. Like, if we don't think that's going to have some effect in them and their view of the world, I think we're foolish. And that there's going to be a set of people in their generation who are then going to write about that and figure out, hey, how do I make sense of that? How do I make sense of this remote first world that I'm living in? How do I make sense of technology as teaching tool? Like, on and on and on. It'd be very difficult for me to go back and recommend In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters and Bob Waterman,
Hmm.
even though the concepts that they talk about in that book are the same concepts that we talk about now as being important as leaders.
Yeah. By the way, total rabbit hole. There's a period piece coming out about COVID, a movie called Eddington. I read the review. It looked really fascinating, about the two perspectives of the pandemic. Anyway, hey, I know Jim wants to jump in here. Just a reminder, we're enjoying our conversation today with Todd via Darley, our great sponsor based in America's Midwest. They've been a trusted partner of the U.S. military and first responders for over a century. And Darley ensures their customers are equipped for success. And again, we take great pride in working with them and glad that they can promote what we're doing to their clients and other leaders that are looking to grow, as we've been talking about on this show. And you can learn more about them at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
Yeah. Jan, I'm glad that you kind of asked that question about the kind of the Stoic philosophy, because that was like coursing through my head as well. Because, one of the things I think about is, and I tell people is, I said, listen, if people have been doing something for 2,000 or 3,000 years, you should probably pay attention. If it stood the test of time, you should probably pay attention, whether it's acupuncture or a philosophy or something else. Like, you might want to think about that a little deeper if it's stuck around for that long, because it's clearly not a fad, and things just don't last if they don't have substance. And so,
Kind of like folk music. Hey, Jim?
no, because I know who you're going to bring up. You're going to talk about Harry Chapin. But so along with that, my mind goes to the one book that frustrates me. Okay. Because I was always so upset with it, but I loved it. When I read it first, Good to Great, I thought that book was great. And then, years later, like Motorola falls apart, what was the Circuit City goes away, all these companies go out of business. You're like, I don't know. I just didn't buy into it. Yet, even with all those failures that were so in the moment, as you described, Todd, even with all those failures, like Gino Wickman, like builds up EOS, okay? And they use that book like religiously almost. So, what's your hedgehog principle? And they use all these elements from that. And so there's part of that book that has been so terribly effective and incredibly impactful in getting people to actually make change, not just read about change, not just think about change, but actually make change. What is it in a book that you've noticed that gets people to actually not just oh, that's interesting, and then put it back on the shelf and not do anything? What is it that gets people to act?
I think it requires an active choice. I think that one of the things that I ask people is to make sure, are you reading for entertainment or are you reading for insight? Right. So am I reading because, gosh, I just like business books. I like reading about business, and, it's kind of fun to know what the current lexicon is and be able to be conference room conversational when people are talking about it, or maybe be the first person to be like, oh, I read this new book and it's really great. And I think that could be helpful in a certain sense, but I think unless you're reading books where you're working on the things that are challenging to you, that chances are that that material is not going to have the impact that you want to have in your life. I think it's really that simple. I think that I think it's great to have more knowledge to be able to draw against, but I think if you're not sort of asking yourself that question, like, how will I act differently after I'm done reading this book? What experiment will I do? If I don't have, if I don't have a script or a question, a different script I can bring to a conversation, whether it's a sales conversation, a coaching conversation. If I don't have a different question where I'm thinking about what do I need to think about that might be a blind spot for me in this particular situation, I think you're missing the opportunity of the value of the books that you're reading.
So I've got a quick kind of question. It's somewhat related based on these trends and patterns. I think we've been in a phase where, and I don't know if it's coming to an end or not. You can tell me, where like, if your book came out, it was a business book, and it wasn't just like cited with like tons of like data, that it was like worthless. It's like, it doesn't have any merit if I can't have the data supporting whatever you're claiming. Yet I think we're kind of shifting, because there's maybe a like popular books, like maybe From Strength to Strength or something like that. It's like, there's no data in there, but it's just like, it's powerful. It's an impactful book. And so, like, where are you? Give us a read from your perspective on like the data heavy, research, academic supported books versus the more opinion books that sometimes are out there.
Yeah. I think I would say two things. I think you're right about the trend, that I think we're seeing less of that. But I think what we need to understand there, or what led to that trend, was the fact that, frankly, what neuroscience has done pretty much to any fraction of psychology, performance, um, it's affected everything. It's affected everything. And so we needed a period of time to kind of process what all of that research was going to say about us. And so sometimes it was researchers actually quoting it. Sometimes it was journalists coming along saying, hey, here's a compilation of that work, and let me show you my notes to make sure that you believe what I'm saying. So I just think we can't underestimate the last 30 years of neuroscience, of like applied neuroscience, and what that's done to, in particular, to this field of business and self-help and personal growth and so on. So I think that's one piece. I think the second piece is, I think that there are some people that are strong customers of those kinds of books, Jim. And what I mean by that is, if I work in a large organization and I'm going to bring in a philosophy to a group of people, and let's think in the hundreds of people, the people above me are going to probably want me to be certain that this philosophy is something that is backed by research, backed by past success by the person who's suggesting it. And, the stakes are high in those organizations for that. So I think that kind of environment encourages that kind of book. I think that the second piece that you're speaking to is really a long-term trend that I think's been going on probably since the pandemic, but maybe longer back, which is, I think we're seeing a long-term shift away from books that give us a path for success. Here are the steps. I would say that's what a business book tended to do. It said, if you want to be successful, do these 7 things, and I'll almost guarantee you'll get where you want to go. Where, frankly, I think there's a new reader who wants to be given permission that it's okay to do something.
Interesting.
And I don't, and I think it's a generational thing, Jim and Jan. I think it's a generational thing. I think that there's something 40 under that, and that's going to sound, it could sound like I'm making some big, huge generational statement. I don't think that's the case. I think we've always wanted ways to be acknowledged and to acknowledge, hey, is this the right path to go? As the world gets more and more chaotic, thinking that there's some set pattern that's going to get us guaranteed to the place that we want to go, frankly, isn't helpful. And I think the kind of books that we're being shown now are really around a more resilient approach to making a path forward and being flexible. And what we're seeing is largely a move towards what I think has been traditionally more self-help books, where we're more introspective, that we are probably getting in our own way around whether or not we're having success. And if we're not willing to address that, and again, like when I think of the both of you and the kind of how you work with clients around leadership, the work is internal most of the time. It's not, hey, I need to go fix some business thing. Like, yes, that's part of it, but a lot of times you had something to do with why that turned out the way it did. And so I think we're seeing more and more interest in us being willing to explore those areas and be more honest with ourselves about what role we play. And so I don't know if we need as much research, Jim, or if we do, it's selective. But more often what we need is something that looks more like the Stoics or spiritual practices that get closer to us being willing to ask really deep questions about the work that we do and how we work with other people.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about all the guests we've had on the show over the last almost 10 years, all the people we've interviewed, all the books. And I mean, they've all had something to say, and, but I keep going back to there's this one guy named Joe McCormick who's got a trilogy of books. One's on being brief, saying less than more. The second one is on noise, basically cutting it out and focusing. And the third is on quiet. The only way to get it is to schedule it. And I really think, when I look at all the books, like, he is like the most unique person that's got a perspective that hits on the biggest problems that I personally see. I'm wondering, as you look, at 100 books, is there one that like just really stood out and you're like, you know what? I mean, like, if I had to say, one book, 2 books, 3 books, here's
them all.
Yeah.
It's always so hard, Jan. Like, if I had to pick one, it would be Your Brain at Work by David Rock. Your Brain at Work by David Rock. I find that he's a mid-known author. He's not a best-selling author. He certainly isn't also an author that nobody knows of. But David Rock's work, he has done the best job. It almost goes back to Jim's question a minute ago. He has absolutely done the best job of taking the neuroscience, interpreting it for the business leader, and then talking about it and how does it apply in the professional setting. I've never seen a better description, better metaphors for what's going on. I'll give you one very quick anecdote, which was my aha when I read the book. If we go to the gym and we work out our muscles, we know that working out our muscles to failure is something that we want to do. It's important. And we fully expect that our muscles will fail in certain scenarios. Somehow we don't have that view of our brain. We don't think our brain is only going to do so much and then it's going to fail. But the prefrontal cortex sits on the front of your forehead, 1/8 of an inch thick, something like, about, see, now I'm on video, like 3 square inches, 6 square inches, something like that. It only has so much ability in a given day to actually function and do the higher level thinking that's necessary. So Jan, when you start talking about focus, you start talking about quiet, you start talking about, those are the things that help the prefrontal cortex. But the prefrontal cortex fails. Like, it literally is an organ in your body that has only so much capacity. And at highest function, you've got a couple of hours a day. If you don't realize that, and you don't build your day and your activities around that, you are not functioning at the highest point possible. So to me, that was like, oh my God, I need to reorganize my day. I need to think about what things am I going to put in this section of my day from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. I'm not going to let anything else happen, because everybody's got their different chronotypes, right? That what time of day works best for you. I tend to work a little bit better in the morning. But that insight forced me to change how I organized my entire day. And there's more insights from that. And here's what's super interesting. This goes back to your fiction question.
Yeah.
What's cool and interesting about this book is that there's a fable threaded through the book. So each chapter starts with a story of a character, of kind of what happened. They then say the brain science of what happened to them in that story. And then they retell the story of what it looks like had they had the insight, had they known what they just taught you. And every chapter is a different version of that. And I just find it absolutely fascinating. It's actually another good use of, I'm glad we came up with that example there, because it's a good use of fiction next to hard science.
Wow. I want to read that book 100%. Like that. This is right down my alley.
It's really good.
So I need to read that book. One of the ones I was thinking about as we were talking earlier, and I don't know if you've read it, but I'm always interested in books that surprise me. They're like, wow, I didn't know that. And we were talking about, let's say, you know, historical, kind of examples and whether they're timely or timeless or not. But there's a book called The Unseen Leader by Martin Gutman. Okay. Or Gutman, I think is the way he pronounces it. I think he's, Swiss. But he talks about famous leaders, but that like Lawrence of Arabia or Winston Churchill, or I'm trying to think of some of the others that he talked about, where he's like, there's another person that you don't know about that might have been probably more consequential, more impactful. And you need to kind of go behind the scenes and learn about them. And they're the one that's more impressive. And in all these cases, there are some just fantastic stories. And I thought that was just like, to me, was like, it just upended things I was thinking about. I'm curious if there has been a book, not just that surprised you, but they like upended your thinking on a topic. And all these books, it's like, wow, I looked at the world differently after I read, maybe, and you don't have to pick one book, but like a couple books that like really altered your trajectory.
If you're watching the video, you're going to see me looking at my bookshelf here, thinking about that question for a second. For me, and it ties to leadership, the book I think of is Reboot by Jerry Colonna. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've had him on the podcast, but Jerry is, he ran a technology magazine. He was a venture capitalist kind of in Web 2.1 and 2.0, 1.0 and 2.0. He led the organizing committee for New York City in 2012 to try to bring the Olympics to New York City. So you think, oh my gosh, this is somebody I want to listen to. He also, in the same book, talks about his attempts at suicide, about his hospitalization for mental illness, the mental illness that his mother had. He was the grandchild kind of immigrants, kind of that immigrant society in New York. And Jerry's amazing in that he says, if you don't understand the stories that you have about yourself, then you can't possibly be the best possible leader. And so he just asks, like, you get to the end of one of the chapters and he'll ask you, what relationship do you have to money that you were taught by your parents and family? Because if you don't understand your relationship to money, how can you possibly be a business leader or running a large organization, right? Oh my God, I never thought about my relationship to money in that sense. So I think Jerry does the best job. He reminds me of Warren Bennis. If either one of you have read a bunch of Warren Bennis, where Warren Bennis says, the leadership is a crucible. Like we are forged in the crucible. Like that's the kind of language that Bennis would use. Jerry would just be much more matter of fact about it. That, yeah, that's exactly what happens. And, the opportunity to you is to see whether or not you're going to see yourself differently as a result of those crucible moments. And then are you going to take the opportunity to see what it is that you might not normally see? And he's got the creds, like he's got the, he puts it all on the table. He's like, okay, what about you? Like, he's like literally almost saying, what are you going to bring to this conversation? And are you going to bring enough to actually be the leader that you could possibly be? And so I was just really touched by Jerry's book. So I would, the book called Reboot, he has a second book after, I think, called Reunion, about belonging. So over and above, that would be my book, Jim.
Awesome.
Hey, Todd, time has absolutely flown by. We're going to have you back on for sure. We didn't talk about nearly enough books. How would you wrap this up? What would you leave with our listeners?
Please build a habit of reading. Like I can't think of a better habit for a leader. Most leaders that I know are readers. It's usually not a big stretch. I think a lot of them struggle with sort of how do I get to the books? What should I read? What's my biggest problems? I hope the 100 Best is helpful with that. But I hope that they don't let everything else get pushed out of the way and not be able to have that important habit of reading. That would be my biggest hope for your audience.
Yep. That's awesome.
Todd, thank you for not only being on the show and being our guest today, but being a good friend. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jan. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. For our listeners, we'll include ways to connect with Todd, learn about his book, 100 Best Books for Work and Life. To connect with him in our show notes, you can find all that at theleadershippodcast.com. And remember, the things I want to know are in books. My best friend is the man who will get me a book I ain't read. Abraham Lincoln. That's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.